The idea with this session is CEOs of companies that are changing the world. Companies that have missions that are designed beyond simply creating shareholder value, serving a variety of stakeholders, serving environmental and other social missions, serving customers, employees, other stakeholders. And I'm really interested in talking with this group about how they define those missions and how they seek to serve those missions. And particularly, I think a lot of people think of these sort of social missions as being in tension to the mission of serving shareholders. And I think everybody on this panel will take the position that, in fact, that's not in tension. They're doing all of these things simultaneously. And so I'm interested in what's the value proposition there? How do you make the case to shareholders that this broader social mission is also in the interest of the shareholder party? We have with us today John Mackey, the co-founder and co-CEO of Whole Foods. Masiyiwa, who is the founder and chairman of Econet Wireless, a communications company doing business in the developing world. Mycoskie, the founder and chief shoe giver of Tom's, which is about to celebrate its 10th anniversary. And Kristin Groos Richmond, the co-founder and CEO of Revolution Foods, which provides healthy school meals. So I want to start with John, because when we had our pre-call for this session, I talked about the tension between shareholder goals and social goals, and you reacted quite strongly that, in fact, that's not a tension at all. So I'd like to hear from you about how you define your missions at Whole Foods and why you see serving the 7 missions that you have set out there as being fully in line with serving the shareholder mission.
Well, oftentimes the way the question is framed up is that there's trying to make money and you're trying to do social good, as if these somehow or another were opposites, as if there's some type of trade-off that you make. And if you adopt a stakeholder philosophy that you're trying to create value for all of your major stakeholders simultaneously, your customers, your employees, your suppliers, your investors, as well as being good citizens in your community, you don't see the contradiction. You just create strategies where all of those are simultaneously winning. And if, in fact, if they're not all winning, then it's not a very good strategy. So I just sort of reject the premise of the question that somehow or another, if you're being socially responsible and you're being a good citizen in your communities, that somehow or another that comes at the expense of the shareholders. If that's the case, then I don't think you're managing your business very well.
So should every company then have a structure like this? Like let's take Tom's, for example. Tom's, obviously, the famous thing is giving away one for everyone that's sold. Should every apparel company be doing that?
No, because I think, as John says, it's about a strategy for your company. And every company has a different strategy, has a different thought on how they can, be successful in the marketplace. And I think that, for our business, as we started with this idea of one for one, and we saw that really resonated with customers, we will always do one for one, whether it's shoes or eyeglasses, which we do, or working in the coffee space or bags. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we think that's a strategy for every single company to emulate. Now, I personally believe that, this idea of conscious capitalism, which Whole Foods and other companies have, really led and created, is that you actually can increase, profits and value for your company by paying attention to all the stakeholders in the business. And I think every business can do that and can learn from that. But I don't think every business necessarily should have a one-for-one model just because it's worked for us.
Strive, why don't you talk a little bit about the company you've built, because you're doing business in a lot of places that are very underserved, that other companies seem to have looked at and decided that it's not worth putting in the capital investment there. But my sense from you is that you view that both as, at least a quasi-philanthropic mission where you're providing communications infrastructure where there wasn't before, but then also providing a real profit-creating mission there because you're entering markets that are unserved and therefore provide great opportunities. Is that right?
Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to speak here. I established a telecommunications group some 25 years ago. I'm sorry about the positive feedback.
Yeah, is there a way to adjust the feedback? I'm sorry, continue.
Thank you. My business, we build telecommunications infrastructure, what you in America call mobile networks. And we built infrastructure across some 17 African countries. From the outset, we realized that we are working in communities where there are extraordinary challenges. At the time I set out to build my business 25 years ago, the great challenge of that day was HIV/AIDS, and it was orphaning millions of children. And my wife and I established a foundation to help these children. And today we support some 40,000 children with scholarships. We keep them in school. We've sent more than 200,000 kids to school. And some of them have made it as far as the United States. We have over 350 in the United States this year. One is a Rhodes Scholar this year. So these are kids who were orphans on the streets. They could have been child soldiers. They could, but you have to respond to what's in your society. You cannot be one-dimensional as a business leader today. You have to respond to, it's good business, if you want to put it that way, if you have stable communities. So you have to look broadly beyond simply how is our business doing.
Kristin, your business is organized as a B corporation.
It is.
I was wondering first if you could explain a little bit about what Revolution Foods is, but then also why you chose that ownership structure and whether, is that essential for the social mission structure that you have?
It is. So Revolution Foods, we actually are celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year as well. We started in 2006 to dramatically increase access to healthy, fresh, affordable meals for students and now families through retail. And we saw an environment, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, of just skyrocketing rates of obesity and an incredibly broken system. We saw the ability to bring in food that would set kids up for success and then educate to build lifelong healthy eaters. So that's how we got off the ground. We serve about 1.5 million healthy meals a week across 1,000 schools. And really inherent, or in our DNA, we are a values-based company. And my favorite expression is, our values create our value as a company. And so the B Corp structure has been very important for us. We've also been very, very intentional about building an investor base and a governance to go along with that B Corp base that reflects folks who are aligned with the mission and the values and the greater impact of changing the system for American kids.
Could you talk a little bit about what the B Corp is and how that changes your governance and what it means to be a B Corporation?
Sure, it's great because B Corp basically defines our governance structure. When we're thinking about making decisions as a board, as a management team, we're thinking both about the shareholder value created through that decision, but we're also thinking about how that decision impacts our communities that we're serving. So it's really considering both shareholder value impact as well as mission impact. The great thing for us, which is similar to what John said, is the two are hand in hand. Without serving our base of kids and families in a quality way, the company has no value. So we haven't found a contradiction between those two. It's really just strengthened the values base that strengthened the impact and success of the company.
So I guess the big question I have is if this is as universal as you're describing it as being, that serving all of these groups together is essential to serving the shareholder well, is this something that should really be generalized through the space? Not necessarily a one-for-one model, but should every company really be thinking about their mission this way, defining a broad set of stakeholders and believing that if they serve all of them, that will serve the shareholders well? So like, John, would you say that your competitors who do not take this approach, are they making a mistake? Should they be copying Whole Foods in this regard?
They're all copying us, regretfully. So one thing I kind of want to clear up, which is, I mean, I think business is inherently socially responsible. I mean, business is creating value for its customers, right? It's creating jobs, providing benefits, helping people, giving them opportunities to learn and grow in the workplace. They're trading with suppliers, and that money ripples through the economy that way and creates more prosperity. They're creating value for their investors. They pay major taxes. They're philanthropic. I mean, business is, it doesn't have to atone for the crime of being a business. Business is inherently socially responsible. Of course, there are bad actors out there in business, just like there are bad actors in political system or lawyers or doctors. I mean, business is sometimes held up to this unfair standard that we don't hold up other professions to. But yeah, I think business should have a higher purpose than only making money. If you think about it, what's the higher purpose of a doctor? It's to heal people. Doctors are well compensated. The higher purpose of teachers, they educate, architects design buildings, engineers construct things. Every one of the professions refers back to some type of value they're creating in the world besides money. Only business, usually by the intellectual enemies of business, puts it in this narrow category that it's just about money. I think that diminishes business and lowers its social legitimacy, when in fact business is the greatest value creator in the world. So yes, I do think, in answer to your question, that business should have a purpose beyond just making money, although of course it needs to make money too, or it can't exist.
Does anyone on the panel disagree with the proposition that business is inherently socially responsible? Or is that, because if that's the case, then isn't every business a socially minded business?
You could say that.
Okay. So then what makes your company special if every business is a socially minded business?
Most businesses aren't particularly conscious of it, A. And B, the fact that you're creating value for all these stakeholders doesn't mean you can't take on a bigger challenge, as like Tom's has done, or Kristin has done, or Stride has done, or Whole Foods has done. That's a good thing. And that's good for all of our stakeholders, including our shareholders. It helps, our customers are excited about that. I mean, Whole Foods Market's Whole Planet Foundation, we've now given out, I don't know, 3 million microcredit loans in over 70 countries in the United States. We've helped literally millions of people get better lives for themselves. That's very exciting to our customers, our team members, even our investors. I think that helps us be more profitable and a more successful business. There's no contradiction.
Yes.
I think to that point, what John just said about the effect on team members really cannot be emphasized enough. Having a mission or something to rally your organization behind allows you to attract incredible talent and retain and motivate that talent much more than just monetary mechanisms. And so when you're thinking about the giving aspect and the mission of our businesses, I do think that is a competitive advantage that we have and that all businesses can have if they find a way to integrate this in a more specific way in their business. Because when you can attract and retain amazing talent, that's one of the key ingredients to winning.
That's right. Just to build on that a little bit, when we started, we made a decision that every person in the company at Revolution Foods would have access to equity, whether you were a production assembly worker, whether you were a dishwasher, whether you were a driver, whether you were the CEO, whether you were a school account manager. And we did that with precisely this vision of it's the right thing to do, but it's also going to pay back in retention, in reduced training cost, in higher sort of career trajectory for people. And it's paid off, and it was making that decision that's really allowed us to build our team successfully.
So, Blake, I want to ask about the 10th anniversary. Sort of, when you looked starting Tom's 10 years ago, obviously the business has been wildly successful. Has it been successful in the manner that you predicted, or have you had shifts in the social mission or any of the other missions over that period where you discovered an unexpected thing that worked for you or that worked differently than you expected?
Well, I think the biggest thing is when we started, it wasn't really even a business, it was a project. It was a kind of a spontaneous response that I had to meeting some children in South America that didn't have shoes and wanting to take more of an entrepreneurial approach than your typical charity approach. At that time, I was running an online driver's education company and was as far away from shoes and this type of giving as I could be, but it was my way of kind of responding to a need that I saw. So it wasn't like I had like this big vision when it initially started. Now, as we saw momentum and customers liking our shoes and people connecting to our mission, we started really thinking about, okay, if we're going to do this and we're going to really think about impact in a more sophisticated way than just the number of shoes that we give away, what has to change? And one of the biggest changes has been is we not only just focus on the aid that we're providing through our one-for-one model, but we put a lot of our attention onto our supply chain and how we can use that to create jobs in the countries that we're giving shoes in. So right now, about 40% of all the shoes that we give are actually made in the countries that we're giving in. And so we now have a factory in Haiti. We're the only shoe manufacturers in Haiti post-earthquake. And this has created a lot of jobs and a lot of excitement and hope, and even bringing other businesses to Haiti to show that it is possible post-earthquake to tap into this really willing and excited workforce. We also have manufacturing in India, Kenya, Ethiopia, many of these countries that we didn't have manufacturing in 5 years ago, and that has really come as a shift to our model to evolve beyond just being one-for-one and aid-based, but also using our model to help people in the job creation. And that's really important to our customers, because I think the customer that we had 10 years ago when we started got really excited about this radical idea of I can buy something for myself and help someone at the same time. And then a lot of companies started doing that, and our customers grew in their kind of, in their sophistication as well, and they started saying, well, that's good that Tom's does that, but I actually want to see you using your supply chain to help people with jobs, because that's really important. And they started asking more questions about what type of materials are you using. So we have to continue to grow and evolve, and that's what we've done because it's important to our customers.
So can I ask, I assume when you're making those decisions to manufacture locally and other shoe manufacturers are not choosing to do that, I assume there's some difference in cost structure there. And so in order to make up for that, there has to be some difference in the price you're able to charge.
Sure.
Is it a big cost difference or a small cost difference? Like how big does that marketing advantage need to be to make it worthwhile to make these location-based decisions that I want to be in the market that I'm also doing philanthropy in?
Well, I mean, I think with simple math, the marketing advantage has to be enough to cover the cost.
Right.
Or to reduce the cost you would spend on the marketing to have the loyalty of the customers. But the interesting is, surprisingly, with everything that's happening in China and how fast and rapidly the middle class is growing and them creating so much goods for their own consumption, that these costs are actually not as great as you would think, especially because it takes out all the transportation costs. So when we make in Haiti and give in Haiti, we're no longer making in China and shipping it all the way to Haiti and dealing with all of that. So there's a savings both in carbon footprint, but also in real hard dollars by eliminating the transportation cost and making it locally.
Strive, I know we were talking before the session about that you need to be creating jobs in your market so that people have money in your market to buy your product. Do you do that as a formal calculation? Is that a part of your market scoping when you're deciding to enter a country, and how do you measure those feedback effects?
Well, I mean, just consider for a moment the challenge of migration that Europe is facing. Surely the long-term solution is to be able to create jobs. I mean, the conflicts of Syria and others apart, quite a lot of those are young people even crossing the Sahara because they cannot get jobs. So, we have to, as leaders and parents in our generation, we have to look at how we can leverage the resources in our hands in a conscious way. They are, and it's not inherently conflicted with having a high-performance, profitable business. It's just good business to begin to think of how do we ensure that the communities in which we're operating are creating jobs for young people. And there are always things you can do within your own business processes that can open those opportunities.
John, is that something you think about in Whole Foods stores, that the Whole Foods employee needs to be able to shop at Whole Foods. I mean, this is an idea going back to Henry Ford, obviously. Do you think that has relevance today?
That they should be able to shop at our stores?
Well, I mean, that they should
we
have the
don't
financial
prevent them
resources
from
to be able
shopping in our stores.
Right.
We incent them to. We give them a 20% discount.
No, I'm sorry. I mean the broader idea that that supporting the employee base creates a customer base that feeds back to your business.
I just think you should think about the business in such a way that you are simultaneously trying to create strategies where all your major stakeholders are winning.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing that, then you don't have very good strategies. But once you take on the framework that your responsibility as a leader is to find strategies where you're not making stakeholder trade-offs, but you're actually creating stakeholder synergies, you're on the right track.
How much has this changed over the history of Whole Foods as a business? Are there, strategies that arose midway through that you realized that were...
Of course, I'm an entrepreneur. You figure it out as you go along. Right. I didn't go up on a mountaintop and God told me what to do. We started out, you start out with one store, you make mistakes, you learn, you do a second store, we're continuing to learn. In fact, we're evolving more rapidly right now than any time in our history because the entire food industry is being massively disrupted. Never seen such change before. It's exhilarating, and you better be able to move quickly.
Do you think that as you've had this sort of increased consciousness about food among customers, and sort of people both becoming more conscious about the global effects of what they're eating and then having specific concerns around local eating and GMOs and such, do you think that the public sentiment about that aligns well with serving global stakeholders in that? Are customers focused on the right things, and therefore can you simultaneously serve those customer attitudes? And
well, first I'll make a note that one of the myths out there is that the hardest stakeholder to serve are your investors. We're a public company. You always hear about the quarterly earnings pressure, and isn't that horrible? Well, the fact of the matter is that the investors are the easiest stakeholder to serve because they're the least conflicted. They just want you to make money, and they want the stock to go up. And as long as you do that, they think you're a good manager, and if you're not doing that, then they begin to question that. The customers are far harder to make happy because they are all over the place. Take GMOs, one of the things I never talk about in public, along with sex, politics, learned that one the hard way, religion. Some of your customers think GMOs are from Satan and the devil, and the others think if you're against them, you're a Luddite. You can't win on that question except to try to be transparent. So customers are conflicted. Some don't want to buy anything that's not local. Some won't want to buy anything that's not organic. We got PETA picketing us at times, and it's a circus out there. The customers are all over the place. They're by far the hardest stakeholder to make happy. Followed closely by your team members because they have their own agendas. The investors are relatively easy when you think about the stakeholder relationship management. But I think you have to manage them all, and you need different strategies to make them all happy. But that's the job of the leadership to do that.
Kristin, can you talk a little bit about your stakeholders around food, because you're trying to get children to eat healthier? How do you define what it means for a meal to be healthy, and who are you accountable to about that?
Sure. So our stakeholders are both our schools and the students and families we're serving. When we entered the space, our goal was to provide real, fresh, healthy food. And for us, that means simply no artificial anything. Right within that, so no high fructose corn syrup, no added colors, no added preservatives, no added flavors. A lot of the space when we were entering schools, they were just highly processed, packaged, giant sort of microwaves heating this food that was going out to kids with few if any fresh fruits and vegetables. The system has really, really improved, but our goal was to have simple, and is today, to have simple, fresh, all-natural food for kids. Now, as a mom, because I have 2 little boys, you have to equally balance that with food that's designed by kids, that's culturally relevant. When you're serving New Orleans and Oakland and DC, very different ideas of what a great lunch is, what a great supper is. So we spend a lot of our time interfacing with our stakeholders around creating meals that are both going to be delicious and very, very nutritious. And our schools, because they're looking out at what they want is for their kids to have full bellies of nutritious food and be set up to learn. So they're very, very aligned with that strategy. And the last thing I'll mention is on our jobs, it's also incredibly aligned. We're the second fastest growing inner city job creator in the United States for the second year in a row. We have about 1,800 employees, and most of those employees, almost all of them, come directly from the schools and communities we're serving. So when you have moms, dads, aunts, uncles creating the food you're serving, delivering the food you're serving, managing the company, then you absolutely have a better product. You have more buy-in. You have more heart and mission and drive there to make it work. So I wholeheartedly agree that the strategies need to align and deliver a great product for stakeholders. And again, to finish the full circle, your investors are happy when that happens.
So then I want to ask you a similar question to the one I asked Blake, which is that if you are focusing on having all natural ingredients and local employees and this different model from your competitors, what does that mean for your cost structure? Are the meals more expensive? And then how do you close that gap? Is it convincing school boards it's worth paying a premium for this? Is it some other cost advantage? How does that work?
Well, it's taken a little time. So in our first couple years, we were not able to provide this quality of meal within, for us, the National School Lunch Program. About 80% of our kids qualify for free and reduced lunch, which means they rely on school meals as a primary source of nutrition. So in the first couple years, we were slightly above that reimbursement rate level, and with volume and designing the supply chain right from, I should say clean label supply chain from the ground up, we had an investment to make. We worked hard for a few years to be able to drive that scale through the supply chain and really refine our operations in order to optimize a cost structure that today delivers, again, 1.5 million meals a week within that reimbursement rate. It did take time. It did take investors that believed in us for that additional or initial investment. But the really exciting thing about it is if you build it right, my experience is now that the market, which is really exciting, is really shifting. All schools want to do the right thing for their kids. We're actually able to provide a healthy, real food meal to kids more affordably than anybody else because we built it that way from the ground up.
So most businesses that if they develop an innovation like this, they'd like to protect it and be able to charge a premium price for their unique product. But I assume you guys would like schools that are not using this approach to copy what you're doing, right?
Yeah, so what we've done, and that's a really good question, so how do you think about the market advancing and competition? The exciting thing is that we sort of went from a full service for schools, meaning breakfast, lunch, snack, supper, to now doing that for schools that need it, but then working with, in our case, large school districts for product lines and complements that basically help them put the right platform together. So in Austin, that means healthy suppers. In Newark, that means healthy after-school snacks. In Oakland, that means healthy suppers. So we've really created a product offering that allows us to complement the system, therefore, allowing those great food service directors and school leaders to build a comprehensive program that delivers their needs.
In a few minutes, I'll open the floor for questions. Can we bring up slide 1? This just shows, actually, if you have a question, you can email it to me. That's jbarro, J-B-A-R-R-O, @businessinsider.com. And then I'll be able to receive the question up here and read it out. Strive, before the session, you were talking about this distinction that you view your company as engaging in philanthropic activities, but not charitable activities. What does that distinction mean to you, and why is the philanthropic approach better for building a company with a social mission?
In philanthropy, you are looking for solutions. You are trying to understand what is the cause of a problem and trying to get to the root of that problem. It takes longer to respond. You've got to be generational sometimes. you may not see the result in a quarterly reporting sense. Now, there's nothing wrong with charitable response, because there are situations that emerge where you are required to respond to a need in front of you. But you can build a philanthropic approach as a fundamental core in the belief system of your business. Because ultimately, when we talk about businesses, it's people. It's about the values of those who lead the business and those who run the business on a day-to-day basis. So the leader, the founder, the CEO, whatever the title you use, really the question we need to be able to say is, can you walk and chew gum at the same time? Surely you can do that. So there are things, yes, you can do as you're going about your business, but there is a lot of things you can also do as a leader in the community in which you are operating. If you're in a global sense, you've got to be able to respond to challenges as they affect the stakeholders within your business.
Can I jump in on that?
Yes,
real quick?
yeah, please.
So the way I think about it is that most of the major problems that are in the world are going to fall into one of three responsibilities. By far, the most important bucket is business. If business can solve problems and make a profit doing it, it belongs in the private sector.
Yeah.
And that is the great majority of problems that are out there fall into that category, and that's why progress is happening in the world. That's capitalism at work. However, there are certain problems that cannot be solved by business because business cannot figure out a way to make money doing it. That's why we need social entrepreneurs. There are certain things, let's take the animals. You need an organization like the Humane Society of the United States to deal with issues that a for-profit business cannot deal with. That being said, for-profits can partner very successfully with nonprofits. They can provide philanthropic funds. They can also provide expertise and efficiency, technology. Whole Foods partners with a number of nonprofit organizations, and we're richer for it, and so are they. And then third, you've got the government bucket, which tends to be bureaucratic, not very effective, but there are certain areas that neither, particularly global issues, that neither business nor the nonprofit sector can solve without government help. So I think you've got to take the problem and ask which of these is the best. And sometimes it's all three working together in cooperation. But business has an important role to play in this area, but there are limits to what it can do.
How do you choose those partnerships when you partner with charitable organizations? You mentioned microcredit. So why microcredit for Whole Foods?
Well, we asked this question about social responsibility at Whole Foods, which was, we've always been good citizens in the communities that we put our stores. We always try to be socially conscious when we're in those areas. And we asked the question, do we have any responsibility in the communities that we're trading with? And we asked that question. At first we said, no, that's asking too much of us. We can't. But then we said, well, why not? We could do something. And when I read Muhammad Yunus's book, Banker to the Poor, it was like light bulbs going off. It's like, I don't see why Whole Foods couldn't do this. We're trading all over the world. And so then it's just finding good microfinance organizations to partner with. What do we look for? First, we look for integrity. So they're not going to abscond with the funds we give them. And secondly, we look for competence. Who can do it? And they're all over the place. So once you get good microfinance organizations to partner with, then you want to do lots of repeat business with them. And you want to encourage them to go to new markets. So basically, Whole Foods Market is set up microfinance support in pretty much every community that we are trading with in the entire world.
So when you think about companies with these sorts of missions, especially that are in consumer products businesses, some people really care a lot about the social responsibility of companies they buy from, and some people don't really care that much. So I assume a lot of the Tom's target buyers are people who really care about the one-for-one aspect, who really care about social responsibility around the supply chain. Does that mean that these sorts of models are limited to a section of the space marketing to those sorts of consumers who really have those values? For example, what if you're what if you're a business-to-business company? You manufacture, chemicals. You do something where you're not consumer-facing at all. Isn't it a lot harder to have this sort of dual mission because you don't have the marketing benefit associated with your responsibility? And if you are in one of those businesses, what should those people be looking at and seeing what they can take away from this panel, what they should be doing? I'll start with you, but interested in anyone's thoughts on
that. I think quickly, what we've learned is, and what a great person in the industry told me, they said, Blake, someone will buy your shoes once because of your mission or your cause, but they'll never buy them again unless they're comfortable, stylish, the right price. And so as much as we invest in our one-for-one giving, we also invest tremendously in having the right designs and moving with trends. And as our business has matured over the last 10 years, I think probably even more so, that is important. So just because you're a consumer-facing business with a mission doesn't mean you can rely only on that mission to drive your business. Now, to your question about, okay, if you're in a business-to-business type environment, do you not get the consumer marketing benefit, so therefore the cost might be even more so to that type of business? And I think the answer is maybe yes. I'm not in that type of business, so I can't say, but you're right. I think a lot of the benefit that we get beyond what I said earlier with motivating our staff and making, helping attract amazing staff, which that type of business would get that benefit. But a big part of it is the consumer demand that we get. So.
Well, I'll give a little example on our end. We, about 3 years ago, decided to take Revolution Foods from the school market and expand it into the retail market and offer our food at grocery stores. And that was actually driven twofold. One was parents coming to us and saying, okay, we know our students, our kids in this case, are eating Rev Foods every day at lunch. We know they eat the food, which for parents who are packing lunch every day, I know you guys feel the pain there. You never know what's being eaten and what's not. And so parents are saying, I know that my students are eating the food. We trust the ingredient standards because you guys are very transparent about what goes in the food and what doesn't go in the food. And we know it's affordable. So how do we bring this home at night? How do we serve it on the weekend? I'm a busy working mom. How do I have access to this kind of quality outside of the school setting? That's actually what drove us into retail. It wasn't that we were, a socially conscious company. We certainly are, but probably more to your point, it was about a product and an authenticity speaking together and creating a demand for a product at grocery store shelves where, moms felt like, wow, this is a mom-founded company. I know it. I trust it. And that's actually what fueled that growth for us.
I have a question from the audience from Amy Christensen. Actually, for Kristin, you mentioned local employees in your business. What are you looking at sourcing food locally as well? And how does that go? Is that cost effective? Can you get the ingredients you want? What have you found with that?
So we do as much as we can. We have phenomenal partners. I'm thinking of Greg Massa, our brown rice grower in California, who we've grown with over the years, and just really synergistic for both organizations. We're not 100% local because at the end of the day, we are serving very financially constrained organizations. So we do have to be careful about price point, affordability, and of course that real food ingredient standard. So within that promise of delivery to our schools and our families, we then source as much local as we can. Certain geographies, it's much, much easier to source locally. In California, we're in a very different place than we are in Colorado, for instance, with our produce year round. Different place than we are in DC, different place than we are in New Orleans. But everywhere we can, we make an effort to source locally within the cost constraints that we have.
And John, a question from the same questioner. You had mentioned shareholders being the easiest stakeholder to serve, but one concern that's often cited with shareholders in publicly held companies is difficulty in getting them to take the long view on profits. And so I guess my question is whether with these social aspects of the mission or even more broadly, investments that Whole Foods makes for the long term, do you find it is difficult to convince shareholders that something that is not necessarily generating profits this quarter is going to pay off in the future?
I'm not saying there's no quarterly pressures, because there are, but I think it's somewhat exaggerated. I think there's far more. First of all, you want to cultivate the type of long-term investors that sync up with what your business is about. That doesn't mean there's not going to be speculation, there's going to be some churn in your stock, and there's going to be certainly a minority of people that are quite vocal. But they always have the option of selling their stock. And I think sometimes CEOs are too quick to use that as an excuse for their actions. I mean, we're living right now in the long term the decisions that we made several years ago. So some of those decisions were good, some were not so good. So now we're trying to make decisions that will be best for our shareholders, not just next quarter, but not just next year, but 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It's harder to think much further than that. The world's changing so rapidly. But I'm not saying it's not there, but I just think it's exaggerated. The media makes it into a bigger deal than it really is.
How about for the rest of you? Is the difficulty of marrying up a social mission with public investors a reason to resist becoming publicly traded, or is it something that you think you could do in the future if that were desirable from an ownership structure standpoint?
It's the government why you don't want to go public.
Why? Elaborate
Well, because
on
of
that.
all the extra disclosure and regulations that you fall under once you're public. It's not so much that you have these quarterly pressures. Again, that's distortion. The amount. I mean, every time I have to. Basically, I can be a criminal. I can go to jail every time I sign a quarterly earnings report. If there's any fraud somewhere in the organization, I'm ultimately held responsible for it. So, the type of regulations that hit public companies now through the SEC and through various other Sarbanes-Oxley. One of the most interesting things I've observed is that we now see more and more value being extracted out of venture companies before they ever go public. I mean, Uber, for example, is a good example of a company that's, I mean, they're getting such massive private equity valuations. Once you go public, you enter into another domain of regulation. So there's more and more values being extracted due to these regulations so that the investors can capture more value before it goes public because it gets more difficult after you go public.
So that's interesting. You think that's mostly a regulatory story. You don't see a bubble in venture funding that's just making that
I think that bubble is
priced?
because of what I'm just saying. Companies have less incentive and motivation to go public because of what happens once you're now under this microscope all the time. I have great envy of some of my private competitors that don't. Trader Joe's is a great example of a company that nobody knows anything about them, and I'm not going to trash them on public here because it's locker room talk, but they fly under the radar largely, and Whole Foods never does. Yeah. So there's an advantage to avoiding that type of regulation and disclosure. Everybody sees what we're doing. We can't see what our competitors are doing if they're private.
Blake, have you guys thought about going public? Are these things that, unnerve you about it?
I mean, I don't have a desire to rush to go public by any means. Now, is that a possibility for the future? Absolutely. I think the key is really making sure that the investors understand, what your mission and the way you create value in the first place is, and that they sign on to that. I mean, I think Howard Schultz at Starbucks has done a good job of really explaining, like, this is what we're going to do, and if you don't like it, don't buy the stock. And so I think that's one of the key things to going public. I also think becoming a B corporation is another great way to protect your mission if you're going to go public, because you can kind of make part of this into the bylaws of your company, so then you don't run the risk of a shareholder saying you're not providing the most value to us by making these decisions, because you're disclosing that this is part of the bylaws of our organization before ever going public. I think Etsy just did that before they went public.
Yeah, so I think I believe there are only 2 publicly traded B Corps in the world now, or have there been a couple more since the?
I think there are just 2 right now, but
Yeah.
There's definitely a queue of companies kind of growing in the pipeline. So
Do you
it's
think
going to be a
that-
big couple years for.
Do you think that's going to be in 20 years, are we going to look back? Is this going to be a large slice of the of publicly traded companies, or is it? I mean, Etsy is an unusual company.
Yep.
That seems like it could get an especially large amount of brand value out of this compared to most companies. Is this going to appeal more broadly than Etsy?
I sure hope so. I mean, we're taking a good hard look at taking Revolution Foods public when the time is right, and primarily because we want to set the company up for exponential scale and impact and have the currency to do that. But within that, I think values-based companies are watching. We're definitely, looking up to companies like Starbucks and Whole Foods and learning how to, exactly what you said, disclose very, very clearly who the company is, what the goals are, and as I have always done with fundraising, build a financial structure and a projection or an expectation that matches the goals of the company, both short-term and long-term.
John, do you think this is a useful corporate structure? I mean, you said at the outset that every company is a socially focused company. So if that's the case, do we need the B Corp form?
That's a good question. The answer is it's voluntary exchange, so if people want to organize that way, I have no objection to it. And it does allow an entrepreneur to be somewhat more assured they can pursue their social and environmental goals without shareholder interference. If shareholders are willing to go along with that, then I cannot object to it. I do think that puts a little bit of a hurdle to raising capital. I think the biggest advantage of the B Corp form is that they set certain standards up. You can't get into that club just because you want to. You've got to agree to meet certain standards and protocols, and you can also have a club now of other people that are doing the same thing, and that's an advantage for shared information. So I have no objection to the form. I don't think it's going to sweep corporate America because I do think it restricts shareholders being able to get rid of the management. That's a huge hurdle.
I was just going to say one more thing about B Corp that I think is really advantageous that we haven't hit is the impact that it has on consumers and how they look at your brand. And so back to that past comment I made around authenticity of brand, transparency of what's going into, in our case, food, the value and the story behind the brand. I think where we've seen a lot of impact from the B Corp certification has been in working with our retailers and telling our story to the moms and families out there and the schools buying our product. So it is, at the end of the day, it's a third-party verification of the value system that you embody as a company. And as someone who just went through my recertification, it was quite detailed and tedious, but we do it because it holds us accountable on job standards, all the pieces that we speak to.
The question from Sean Bowes in the audience for the panel, asking, have you navigated moments in your business where in fact profit and the fundamental social mission of the company have been at odds? And how do you work with your team and your investors to find a solution to that? Does anybody on the panel, have there been any challenging moments with this in your business where something you really set out to do for a social purpose was proving financially problematic?
I can give one.
Okay.
It hasn't been an issue for us with regards to the way we run our business from what are the quality standards of food that we're serving kids, or how do we compensate our employees. But specific business decisions, like I can recall when we were looking at a very large school district, very, very high impact in terms of the kids we'd be serving and the impact we'd be having on health in that district. The payback period was a little longer than we would typically like for a deal like that and a partnership like that. We would have to invest a little more and take a little bit of a long-term horizon on making sure that that deal was sustainable. And I can remember going to my board and having a really robust discussion about it. And ultimately, we did decide to submit a proposal for that district because we felt like the impact and the sort of midterm return, both financially and health-wise, was worth it. And so we did struggle with, do we just use our typical contribution vetting structure, or do we think a little bit more about the impact and brand and long-term success that we'd be building?
I also have a question about measurement. From a couple of people in the audience have asked this. Basically, it's easy to figure out whether you're making profits. How do you figure out whether you're achieving the other aspects of your social mission? Do you set formal goals? Do you have, boards of observers that evaluate you on whether you're serving your non-shareholder stakeholders? I don't know. Why don't we start with Strive? How do you figure out whether you are achieving the social missions of the company?
Well, you've got to approach it in the same way that you would approach your business. set very specific goals, evaluation. We're in education. We try to get as many children into school as we can for our money. We've got to leverage and make sure that it's efficient. We hire professional people to manage these programs. So you can set clear goals. It's the same if you're working in agriculture or in public health. You can still establish clear guidelines and goals of what you want to achieve.
And then I also received a question about marketing, which is, do you have to spend more on marketing in order to sort of tell everyone about the social mission of the company, or are you able to spend less on marketing because this is viral? Or John, how do you? I mean, I assume this is a key part of Whole Foods' marketing messaging. Is that a lot of paid media, or is that really just a lot of word of mouth and in-store signage?
I mean, it's a lot of public relations, really. I mean, PR, you build a brand through PR. Blake is a really good one to ask this question because I think they spent very little money on marketing, but he's built a tremendous brand primarily through public relations, word of mouth. So I think that we don't spend money advertising the good stuff we're doing. I think that people don't like that. It's like you're bragging about your stuff that you're doing good. It needs to be, I think, social media, and certainly you got to be a little more subtle about that. Nobody likes a braggart, and I think that's true for your. Although, of course, Whole Foods is constantly attacked and judged as kind of being holier than thou. So I guess we're failing to a certain extent in that regard. But I do think it's something that you need to be more subtle and blatant.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is in 2006, when we started, is also the same year that Facebook went off campus. Later that year, YouTube was launched. And so communicating with our customers and fans through social media about our mission and what we were doing was just second nature to us. It was just, we were at that very unique time in which all of this social media was being built. And so it was very authentic for us to be talking to our customers on Facebook all day long, or to be using Twitter as a mechanism for customer service instead of a typical call center. And I think what that's allowed us to do is, to your point, is to not spend the same amount of gross margin that our competitors are spending on marketing, because our customers are telling our story for us. As John just said, it's much more effective, and it can be very off-putting when a company is talking about all the good things they're doing. What's much better is when your customers are talking about how they were empowered to do good through the relationship with Tom's. And so we're much more interested in, where we are investing in marketing oftentimes, is in really through public relations, through being part of different organizations and events, and really creating ways for our customers to tell our story for us so we don't have to spend the money to tell it ourselves. I mean, one of the best examples of that is we've invested a lot in virtual reality in the last year. We have virtual reality headsets in over 100 stores around the world where people can actually go on a giving trip and see the experience of giving shoes and where we go. And we're investing in that experience so then our customers can share, and that's been something that's been shared wildly through social media. Now that Google Cardboard and other technologies are allowing people to do this at a much lower cost, that those videos are being seen at an exponential rate compared to typical videos that we put out. So it's about creating the mechanism for the customers to share the story.
And Kristin, what about for you? Because a lot of your customers are public agencies. How do you market to them?
So I would say we spend probably a fraction of the marketing cost of competitors, much for the same reasons. We also have a really unique opportunity to tell our story to our school communities and then familiarize parents with what we're doing at retail. So that's an amazing opportunity, and a opportunity that we treat very responsibly. We also have a large base of teammates throughout the country who are out telling the story, whether they're delivering food in Houston to schools, or whether they are at Whole Foods or at H-E-B telling the story. it's fantastic to really leverage that employee base because we have just tons of evangelists out there telling the story.
And Strive, how about for you? How does your broad mission fit into your marketing message?
Well, for a start, I don't run a public company, so,
No, I mean for customers.
and I have no marketing budget for philanthropic work. I do what I need to do. You probably only get to learn about it through forums like this, because it's not really my intention to go out and say to people, hey, look, this is what we're doing. As what's more important for us is to reach the communities, solve the problems, and move on.
Okay, that's all our time for today. I want to thank you so much for all your attention.